John Fetterman just crossed a line no Senate Democrat has dared touch. He defected on immigration, publicly supported ICE, and met President Trump face-to-face. His party is calling him a traitor. Now Ilhan Omar is scrambling as Minneapolis erupts into crisis, exposing a Democrat civil war. With their future hanging by a thread, are we witnessing the moment that seals their fate? Or is there still time to pull back from the brink? John Fetterman's Senate record reads like a checklist of rebellion. In the past year, he has voted with Republicans more than a dozen times to keep the government open, defying his own party's push for shutdowns over immigration enforcement. On January 12, 2025, he became the first Democratic senator to sit down with President-elect Trump at Mar-a-Lago, a move that stunned both allies and critics. Fetterman explained, "I'm the senator for all Pennsylvanians, not just Democrats in Pennsylvania. I will meet with and have a conversation with anyone if it helps me deliver for Pennsylvania and the nation." His stance on immigration is blunt. While many Democrats call for ICE to be defunded or abolished, Fetterman refuses. "I reject the calls to defund or abolish ICE. I want a conversation on the DHS appropriations bill," he told reporters. He is also the only Senate Democrat to co-sponsor the Laken-Riley Act, backing stricter detention for non-citizens charged with theft crimes. When pressed by activists to label Trump voters as Nazis or fascists, Fetterman pushes back. "I'm not going to call anyone a Nazi. That's not how democracy works," he told CBS. He is just as direct about government funding. "I will never vote to shut down the government." This is a sharp turn from his 2022 campaign, which leaned into Bernie-style progressivism, hoodie rallies, union halls, and promises to shake up the system. Now Fetterman stands nearly alone in the Senate, holding fast to what he calls common sense while his party drifts further left. The numbers tell the story, a 91% party line voting record, but on the biggest fights, immigration, shutdowns, and Israel, he has gone his own way. Progressive activists wasted no time airing their frustration. As news spread of Fetterman's meeting with Trump and his repeated breaks on funding votes, left-leaning groups sharpened their criticism, especially online. Former campaign allies, once eager to tout his working-class credentials, now call him unpredictable, a wild card who no longer speaks for the party's base. Social media threads filled with accusations of betrayal, some labeling him a traitor to progressive causes. A former staffer dismissed his Trump outreach as a pick-me move, while local organizers vented their disappointment in digital town halls and message boards. Yet for all the online outrage, formal action remained elusive. The Working Families Party, which endorsed Fetterman in 2022, has not issued a primary challenge or withdrawn support, focusing their efforts instead on state races and the upcoming gubernatorial contest. Inside the Senate, the mood is frosty. Fetterman finds himself increasingly isolated, with only a handful of Democratic colleagues willing to cross the aisle on shutdown votes. The Progressive Caucus keeps its distance, quietly discussing his future behind closed doors, but stopping short of public condemnation. Outside the Capitol, protest energy stays diffuse. No mass rallies, no coordinated demonstrations at his offices, just scattered criticism and the sense that a once promising alliance is unraveling. For Fetterman, the message is clear. His brand of common-sense politics has left him out in the cold, caught between a party moving left and a base demanding ideological purity. The backlash may not be organized, but the chill is unmistakable. Federal agents arrived in Minneapolis before dawn, moving in with a scale and speed that stunned the city. The Department of Homeland Security announced the deployment of over 2,000 ICE and Border Patrol officers, the largest immigration enforcement action in Minnesota's history. Within days, the impact was impossible to ignore. Streets that had once buzzed with winter traffic emptied as word spread of checkpoints and raids. Parents kept children home from school. Storefronts on Lake Street and Cedar Avenue, usually open even in the coldest weeks, stayed shuttered. The cost was not just disruption. On January 7th, Renee Good, a mother of 3, was shot and killed by an ICE agent during an early morning operation. 2 weeks later, Alex Prey, a 37-year-old nurse, lost his life in a confrontation with federal officers. Their names echoed through local news, and on handmade signs carried by neighbors braving sub-zero temperatures. By January 23rd, a general strike had shut down large parts of the city. Tens of thousands joined marches, demanding answers and an end to the raids. Hospitals shifted to emergency staffing. School districts announced rolling closures. Minneapolis, often described as a sanctuary, had become the epicenter of a national immigration crackdown. The sense of fear and anger was everywhere, on the faces of families, in the silence of closed businesses, and in the voices of those who had lost loved ones. For many, the crisis was no longer about politics. It was about survival. Ilhan Omar wasted no time stepping into the spotlight as Minneapolis reeled. With federal agents sweeping through her district, she doubled down on her demand: abolish ICE. Not reform, abolish ICE. Her words echoed from press conferences to social media, drawing a sharp line between herself and party moderates. Omar called for the immediate resignation of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, accusing her of turning Minneapolis into a battleground and threatening impeachment if Congress refused to act. She organized emergency town halls, urging supporters to resist what she called federal overreach and to stand against the raids that had left families terrified. Controversy followed her at every turn. Days after a tense public meeting, right-wing media accused Omar of staging a confrontation when a protester rushed the stage and doused her with an unknown liquid. Omar dismissed the claims as smear tactics, insisting she was being targeted for speaking out. The narrative of persecution gained traction among her base, especially as conservative voices amplified the incident. Omar's history as a Somali refugee and her rise from a Kenyan camp to Congress became central to her message. She reminded crowds that America had given her family safety, but now she argued those same values were under attack. Critics pointed to ongoing investigations into her campaign finances and called her ungrateful, while supporters saw her as the last line of defense against a party and a government they no longer recognized. The divide was no longer just about policy, it was personal, and Omar was determined to lead the fight. Chuck Schumer stepped to the podium and delivered his warning. If Republicans refused to strip ICE funding from the budget, Democrats would block the entire government package. The message was clear. Schumer was gambling that the party's future depended on siding with Ilhan Omar and the progressive base, even if it meant risking a shutdown. The numbers did not lie. John Fetterman and 3 other Democrats, Cortez Masto, King, and Tester, broke ranks, voting with Republicans to keep the government open. The rest fell in line behind Schumer, signaling that the party was moving closer to the squad's agenda than to Fetterman's version of working-class pragmatism. Schumer insisted, "We will not fund an agency that tears families apart and terrorizes immigrant communities." But the math was off. ICE already had nearly $78 billion locked in through prior reconciliation bills. Shutting down the government would not defund ICE, it would just freeze paychecks for soldiers and federal workers. For the handful of moderates left, the threat looked less like principle and more like a show for progressive activists. The risk was not just legislative gridlock. It was the message. The party was making its choice, and it was not with the defectors. Tom Homan's arrival in Minnesota brought a new level of urgency to the federal response. The White House announced Homan would report directly to President Trump, bypassing the usual layers of bureaucracy. His job was to restore order, enforce the law, and make an example of Minneapolis. For supporters, this was the kind of leadership they'd been demanding: direct, unapologetic, and willing to take on entrenched local resistance. Homan's reputation as a hardliner on immigration gave the operation a sense of finality. There would be no negotiations, no half measures. The stakes stretched far beyond Minneapolis. Pennsylvania, once a Democratic stronghold, flipped to Trump in 2024 by a margin of just over 40,000 votes. Exit polls told the story. Working-class voters and Hispanic voters moved toward the GOP in record numbers. Among Hispanic voters, President Trump's support jumped from 32% in 2020 to 45% in 2024. For Democrats, the warning lights are flashing. Every enforcement action, every chaotic protest, every split-screen moment of order versus unrest is shaping the next election. The party's civil war is no longer an inside fight. It is playing out in the streets and at the ballot box. The Democratic Party's identity crisis isn't abstract. It's bleeding voters right now. With moderates defecting and progressives doubling down, 2026 looms as a reckoning. Common sense may not trend on Twitter, but at the ballot box, reality still wins. Let me know where you stand in the comments.